Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel, and welcome back to our Garry Kasparov series. So in this series, we're following Garry's life and his chess career, and we're back now in the 1985 World Chess Championship between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov, and we're now in the game 22. Before this game 22, Kasparov had a comfortable 2-point lead, but I've mentioned it before, Anatoly Karpov had his draw odds, so if the match game would have ended in a draw, then of course Anatoly Karpov would have stayed the world champion in chess. And now in the game 22, Karpov had the white pieces, and in the game 24, also Anatoly Karpov had the white pieces, so this game 22 was actually his last chance to make something out of it, to maybe win now one game and try to scare a little bit Garry Kasparov, because before this round, as I said, Kasparov had a comfortable 2-point lead. He needed basically only 2 draws and he's the world champion in chess. So let's check out now what happened, and let's see now how Karpov plays when he has to attack. Many times we have seen by Karpov great positional brilliance, great positional setups. Anatoly Karpov was really a pragmatic and great positional player. Let's see now how Karpov can play when he has to attack the position. And here again, like usual, he opened with the move d4. We have d5 by Garry Kasparov, c4, the queen's gambit, e6, the queen's gambit decline, knight to c3, and now after bishop to e7, we have the so-called Charusek or Peterson variation of the queen's gambit decline. The main goal is to delay the situation a little bit with the knight. Then after potential, like Karpov played c takes d5, e takes d5, we still have opportunities to develop maybe this bishop somewhere here. Bishop to g4, bishop to f5 could be an opportunity here. Karpov played bishop to f4. The main goal of this setup of white is actually a nice and slow positional setup. What we're trying to do is to play e3, then bishop to d3, f3, knight to e2, and then after castling, build really this attack in the center with the potential e4 pawn breakthrough. So that's actually the goal of this setup of the queen's gambit decline, but then exchange variation of white. Here in the game, knight to f6 was played, and as I said, maybe e3, and after castling, the most natural way would be to move bishop to d3. And I probably think that Garry Kasparov had here something prepared in this line. So that's why I think that Karpov surprised maybe a little bit Garry Kasparov with the move knight to f3. Kasparov takes, of course, now the long diagonal. He's preventing this bishop to d3, because if you try bishop to d3, I think black will simply take. Bishop takes d3, queen to d3, and after something like rook to e8, maybe bishop to f8, white would have trouble, because black could occupy maybe in long terms the e4 square. This could be a nice positional idea of black. So that's why after move bishop to f5, Karpov tried a different way. This was probably something that he had prepared at home. He plays now the move h3, and he's trying now to kick away the bishop. He's trying to be now aggressive and try to attack the bishop on f5. We have c6. Kasparov cements the position on the queen side on light squares. We have the g4, bishop to g6, and now knight to e5, attacking simply the bishop. We have knight to d7, and now Karpov simply takes, knight takes g6, and after f takes g6, it's actually better, I think, here to take with the f pawn than with the h pawn, because then you risk really a wild game after potential bishop to g3, h4, h5, bishop to d3, and then queen to c2. I think white would find great ways to attack this position. So this move, f takes g6, opens now the f file, and here we have now sort of a symmetrical position. These are basically 2 versus 3, but it's actually 2 versus 2, because I think black can defend this position much better. If h4 h5 happens, then black has of course also the opportunity to pass through with the move g5 and simply kick away the bishop. So at least we have now 3 pawns from black's perspective in front of our king. I think if you take with the h pawn, then it's much easier for white to attack the position. So that's why f takes g6, bishop to g2, we have knight to b6. What black in this position is trying to do is to cement one of these knights on a very active square. So active squares now, or weak squares in white's position, are of course the e4 square, but also the c4 square. And it's not so easy now to play with the bishop pair here, because in order to create now some dynamics, you are forced maybe to play something like f3 e4, but still it's risky. Of course, you have to also move your bishop. If you do that, then your d4 pawn could be weakness. So it's I've played several times this bishop versus knight middle games, and they're not so easy. You have to find really great plan. If black, for instance, cements one of these knights, and maybe this knight on c4 on e4 could be kicked away by a pawn, then black could have a compact position and then could use simply the square in order to coordinate the attack around that square. I hope I'm not complicating too much, but sometimes I get annoyed when I have this kind of position. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to attack, because when I try to attack this position too much, then I create also some weaknesses. So as I said, this is not easy really to play. So here castling play by Karpov, we have king to h8, and now knight to e2. We have g5, bishop to g3, and now bishop to d6. It's a natural idea here, I think, here by Kasparov, because the bishop is very active here on this long diagonal, and also the bishop on g3 is a nice defensive piece in front of white's king. It's perfectly fine here. Queen to d3 played by Karpov. He finishes his development. He connects the rooks, which is of course a stage of the opening. I've explained it many times. So there are these three stages of the opening. First, develop your minor pieces, securing the king by castling, and then moving the queen from the first rank and connect the rook. So the rook connection is actually the third stage of the opening. Here, knight to a6, and probably this was a moment where maybe Karpov had to make a decision if he's trying maybe to weaken the pawn structure too much. As I said, black's main goal here is to cement one of these knights. If you try here maybe a3 to kick away this potential knight to b4 move, then knight to c4 will happen, and that's actually the problem. You see now one of these knights is cemented. We can cement it further with the move b5, and then maybe with knight to c7, knight to e6, again search for new opportunities for this knight. So this was a provocative move, I think, here by Garry Kasparov. If this knight would have been cemented on c4, this could be really a great positional problem here for white. So that's why Karpov didn't react. He did reacted here differently. He played the move b3, and he's preventing, of course, the move knight to c4. Okay, if you try now knight to b4, this wasn't played in the game, but actually it's not such a huge problem. I think this one tempo against the queen, because we'll simply play queen to d2, and now if you trade off knight to g3, and still I think we had opportunities to maybe cement our knight here on f5. After potential g6, we could play f4 and then maybe f5. So as I said, this move knight to b4 is not bringing also Kasparov so much, I think, in the position. So I think b3 a great positional move here by Karpov, and here queen to e7. Now also Kasparov finishes his development, connects now finally the rook. So here bishop to d6, queen to d6, and now f4. Here Karpov creates now madness on the board. At least he's trying to attack the position. As I said, it's not so easy to play this position. What Karpov can gain here is a pawn majority. Here after g takes f4, we have e takes f4, and what we have gained here is now a 3 versus 2 situation on the king side, and that's actually a great pawn structure for the bishop. So as I said, we don't like statics when we're playing with the bishop against the knight. What we are trying to do is restrict this knight's ability to play. So when we watch this position from white perspective, we are searching how to kick away this knight, how to never ever allow this knight maybe to come here on e4. And that's actually now the battle. The battle is now simply for the e4 square. Of course, Karpov can attack here the position, can maybe split the pawn structure in front of the king, can maybe create some weaknesses in front of the king. But when you do that, of course, you weaken also a little bit your king. So as I said, it's not easy really to play this position. So here rook to e8, we have f5 now with ideas to play knight to f4, and then of course cementing the knight on very good square here on e6. That's why Kasparov prevents this idea immediately with knight to c7, rook to f2. This move is very important because our knight could be hanging, because Kasparov found now great ways how to at least try here to maybe play knight to f6 and maybe knight to e4. This was also now his idea. So that's why Karpov had to play this very aggressive g5 move. And g5 is again attacking, but of course you're weakening further your king. That's the main issue, and Kasparov simply goes queen to e7. What Kasparov is trying to do now is simplify the position, is trying to trade off the queens, and then, as I said, his main goal is the e4 square to cement one of this knight. So here h4 we have queen to e3, rook to d1. Of course, there is this rule in chess: to take a mistake, you don't want to invite your opponent's rook into the game. Now after rook to d1, if black wants to take, we can take. Now you see how important it was to play this move rook to f2. The knight is protected, and after the move rook to d1, Kasparov plays now simply knight to b5. He's trying to attack, of course, this weak pawn on d4. Now finally queen to e3, rook to e3, and now king to h2, and now knight to b6. Again, Kasparov is trying to maneuver this knight, trying to search for good squares. This move knight to b6 seems like a strange idea, but actually it's a great preparation. It's a nice try of a great path of the knight here. Knight to c8, then knight to d6, and maybe knight to e4. That could be Kasparov's plan here. So as I said, his main goal is simply to occupy this weak e4 square. In the game knight to g3, we have now knight to c8, and now knight to f1, attacking the rook. Of course, there is maybe a slightly better move here, knight to h5, because here the move prepares simply further progress with the move f6. F6 would be very dangerous, but here Kasparov makes, I think, his first inaccuracy. After move knight to f1, Kasparov retreats here to e7, and it's okay, you're protecting your 7th rank. When we are playing rook end games, then you want to be the first one to occupy, from white's perspective, of course, the 7th rank. From black's perspective, you're trying to occupy your opponent's 2nd rank. Who probably makes that faster will probably win the game. But actually, there is one better way here after the move knight to f1, and that's actually how you should think in chess. When you get attacked and when you have to maybe retreat, when you don't have counterattacks. I don't think that black has counterattacks here, so first you should always search for counterattacks, but no counterattacks are possible here. When you get attacked, you should search for the next best square, next best active square on the board, and actually here the next best active square is the square c3. Rook to c3 would be much better, because this rook cannot be anymore attacked by a minor piece, cannot be attacked by a knight, cannot be attacked by a bishop. Maybe it can be attacked by a rook, but then we will simply trade off and occupy the e file with this other rook. So this rook on c3 would be very annoying. I think it could cause many trouble. It could cause a lack of development, better progress of white's pieces. Here after the move rook to e7, you see now rook to d3 is possible for Karpov, and he has now the opportunity to compete, at least on the e file. His rook can now play very actively. If Kasparov would have played rook to c3, this move wouldn't be simply possible. So knight to d6. Now Kasparov is trying again this e4 outpost. Knight to g3. We have knight to e4 anyway, although rook to e1. Again, you see, you want to play active with your rooks, and then maybe to play something like rook to e8. Then you would have won the battle on the e file, which is the only open file. You want to win such battles with when you play rook end games. Here knight to e4 is not the most accurate move, because here after bishop to e4, d takes e4, and now rook to e3. Okay, Karpov lost the pawn, but this pawn is also long-term weakness in the game now. King to h3. Kasparov has now the opportunity, Karpov has now the opportunity to activate his king. Rook to e5. We have king to g3, and now a huge blunder here by Garry Kasparov, h5, and basically from this point on, the game is over. Before this move, the evaluation was about, in the position was about equal. After the move king to g4, here rook to e8. Again, you should play with your pieces compact. You should glue them together. You should try to have a nice and firm setup. Probably white is better here still, but I think this was a much better continuation here. After move h5, it gives now Anatoly Karpov the opportunity to get active, very active with the king, because there's now the problem. Rook knight to f5, rook to f5 here after trades of pieces on the square f5. Here Anatoly Karpov can also take the pawn on e4, and the problem is now that probably this was part of Garry Kasparov miscalculation, because he thought probably that he could actually play something like rook to f2, and as we said, who is faster on the second or seventh rank will probably win the game. But here it's not the point, because here you get a very annoying rook to e8 and it's actually checkmate. You can also cover, of course, rook to f8, but you simply lose the rook, so you're forced to play something like king to h7, and then you get g6 and you get checkmate. Probably this was something that Garry Kasparov didn't see. After the move rook to e4, here king to g7, and we said who gets on the 7th or 2nd rank first will probably win the game. And here it's actually a completely winning rook and pawn endgame here for Karpov. Here b5 was played by Kasparov. Here we have rook to a7 after move b4 and king to g4. In this position Kasparov resigned. So let's see now possible continuations. If you try here something like rook to d5, it's not so good. We play simply the move h5. The main goal is now to play the move h6. You could maybe try here some checks, rook to d4, king to f5, and now if you try again into check, king to f4, you could try maybe again new checks, but here after the move rook to d5, we would simply play h6 and the game is over. Nothing that can be done. Even if you take here, then we play simply rook takes g7. You see king, rook takes g7, h takes g7, king takes g7, and now we're simply faster. We'll grab this pawn and the game is over. So there are also some other lines. If you try, for instance, to get back with your king, then you get checked, and we can also push this pawn further. So as I said, g6 is also an opportunity, again preparing some checkmates on the back rank. As I said, after the move king to g4 here by Anatoly Karpov, Garry Kasparov resigned, which means that Kasparov was now only 1 point in front of Anatoly Karpov, and still he had to play one more game with the black pieces. So we said Karpov had his draw odds, so if Anatoly Karpov would have won the last game, Anatoly Karpov would have stayed the world champion in chess. So unfortunately or fortunately, I've covered already this game on my YouTube chess channel, the last game, the game 24. So you can also check it out. I will add it, of course, into my Garry Kasparov list. I've recorded this video 1 year ago or something. So as I said, I didn't know that I will start the Garry Kasparov saga. As I said, you can check it out. It was an outstanding game 24. It was a historical moment. I think one of the most important moments in chess history. Really a wild game. The game 24 of the super final of the 1985 World Chess Championship between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. So you can also check it out. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really interesting game with great strategies, with great attacks. You see how chess games are won with this kind of brilliant attacks. If you want to see, of course, more games from this Garry Kasparov saga, check out my whole playlist. Here's the link. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games of all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.